Hey there guys, this is Reckless Trucker coming to you, and today I'm going to speak about something very serious, and that is mental illness. Now this is something that I don't personally suffer from, at least to any real degree to be honest, but it is something that I care about, and I understand it affects the entire country in a massive economic way, and it affects the families of people who are dealing with this in large ways, and most of all it affects the individuals who are dealing with mental illness. So I've gathered here a few people, 4 people to be exact, who do have some kind of mental illness issue going on, with a range of issues. So I have with me today, in the order that they will be talking about their issues and sharing their stories, is Lawful Neutral, Actually Tina, A Helping Hand, and Master Creep Theater. First off, we are going to be hearing from Lawful Neutral and her story, and mostly her experience about trying to overcome such experiences that she has gone through. This is an issue that was brought on by external problems, and she has learned very well, I believe, to cope with the issue. And so let's hear her story.
Hey, it's Lawful, and in the future I will do a video kind of fully explaining this relationship, but for the sake of keeping this short, I can't discuss that. So I'm just going to very briefly kind of describe how I've overcome feels weird calling it an abusive relationship, but considering this person used fear and manipulation and kept me isolated from friends and family, etc., and actively tried to encourage that isolation, I guess that's probably the most accurate way to describe it. I'm going to discuss how I've kind of overcome that and dealt with it. And first thing is mainly in regards to isolation, not allowing myself to be fully reliant on someone that I am in a romantic relationship with. My current girlfriend is very great and loving and understanding, and has definitely helped a lot in building up trust again in other people, especially romantically, because even when I have random moments where I freak out because I've remembered something that's happened in a previous relationship and it's left me in a very emotional state, she never, makes me feel bad for freaking out, and she kind of just goes, listen, everything's okay, and she's very sympathetic. But just making and forming bonds and relationships outside of a romantic one is incredibly important. Spend time with your family, spend time with friends, make friends. I know it's fucking difficult, but it's important to do so that you don't become reliant and allow yourself to be isolated by a romantic partner, because that's just not healthy. And a good way to do that, which has also helped me, is to freaking find some hobbies. Like, I've always had hobbies, I've always, engaged in martial art, but for various reasons, once again, I became isolated, and certain participation in hobbies was just discouraged by my partner. It was like, why would you rather do that instead of spending time with me? And I was a dumb 14 to 18 year old. I mean, I'm only 19 now. I was very young when I got into that relationship, so I guess you could say I didn't really understand how a relationship was supposed to be. And part of that has been debate. Debate's been very helpful to me in helping me make friends and engaging in something that I'm passionate about. I love public speaking, and I always have done. Even when I was bad at it and very shy, I always wanted to be good at public speaking. And debate has been beneficial to me, and hell, I'm very likely competing in the European University debates this summer, which is really fucking exciting. And these are things that were actively kind of discouraged in me by my partner, and that I'm glad now that I have some perspective. I'm like, no, you shouldn't stop doing things that you love and enjoy for your partner. And also, quite frankly, it's a distraction. It's something that stops me from being in my room, just, thinking about it, which ultimately I kind of think is the most harmful thing. I'm not saying that you never need to confront your own inner demons and think about it, but allowing yourself to drown in it, allowing it to consume you and just constantly thinking about it, like, that's not healthy either. You need to do things to give you a break, find things that you enjoy, even if at first you kind of struggle to enjoy it because you're still kind of thinking about it, if that makes sense. So they're the kind of things that I've done to help deal with the legacy of that relationship. So yeah, I just wanted to keep this short. So I'll see you, and thank you to Restless Strugger for featuring me on his video.
Thank you, Lawful Neutral, for sharing your story. I understand it could be very difficult sometimes. Now, up next, we will be listening to Tina as she recounts her story having to do with stress caused by outside situations, primarily along with the mental illness of ADHD, genuinely clinically diagnosed, and as she deals with the struggles of day-to-day and school life.
I'm actually Tina, and Trucker asked me to help out with his mental illness collaboration, and I just wanted to kind of introduce my experiences. I really didn't know how to go forward with this video, and I just decided I was going to talk about the effect mental illness has had on my life, and then some recommendations I have for people who are also facing similar circumstances. So just to start off, I've always been somebody who has struggled with certain things mentally. And I'm going to go over this real quick because I think it does show kind of my attitude towards the whole thing and how I ended up seeking help later on for something much more serious. And I have been diagnosed with ADD 3 times. I know that it's a lot of people don't consider it a mental illness, and there's some talk about if it's actually an existing thing or not, but I can assure people I've been diagnosed as a child, as a teen, and as an adult. So for me, it is very much real. And I've had it since I've officially been diagnosed with it since I was about 6. And on top of that, I also had a small stutter and some kind of speech disorder where, well, not a disorder, but some speech issues where I couldn't say certain consonants. Like I couldn't say the sh sound for a very long time for some reason. And these happened when I was younger. I probably got diagnosed with it about 5 or 6. And I got really lucky because not only were my teachers able to spot this and report it, and they were told my parents, and the school even offered free speech therapy. And, I also went to the doctor after the school confronted my parents and said, she's very, very smart, but for whatever reason, she's having these problems focusing and having behavioral issues in class. So that's how my ADD got discovered. And then also because the school helped me with speech therapy, I no longer really have the stutter I had, and I don't have an issue with some consonants anymore, which is a good thing because I do a lot of public speaking. So the reason I wanted to talk about this is because even though I know some people may not consider that a mental illness, I've always lived with the fact that it's never a bad thing to ask for help when you need it, especially when something is wrong. And I've had parents who are very supportive and keeping me healthy. Also that, medication is not a bad thing if you need it. So I'm no longer on medication for ADD, even though it's something I struggle with, because I was able to develop coping therapies and was able to, survive without the medicine, even though from time to time I have some weird moments. But because of this, I wasn't afraid to go on medication. It wasn't a stigma for me, and it's not a stigma for my family. And I know it's a stigma for some. So let's go on to the actual recent stuff and kind of the more serious things that have happened. As a teenager and young adult, I've always been, like most teenagers and young adults, I've always had issues with social anxiety, and I've always been kind of a loner and have had some issues with loneliness. But I got a bit better when I went to college, and unlike most people who go to college, I never felt homesick. I had a huge number of friends in my undergraduate degree. It was just very nice. My parents described it as me coming out of my shell, something they had wanted me to do all through high school and never happened. And everything was fine. I mean, I still had some issues like everybody does, and it's normal if you have some, feelings of loneliness or slight feelings of depression. But then I went into grad school, and I've actually been in grad school a lot longer than I wanted to because I was only originally going to do a master's, and now I'm doing a PhD. So the thing about, being in grad school, it's a very high stress environment. There's been multiple studies that will show you that a lot of graduate students, especially in real degree programs, and we know what I all mean by real degree, such as STEM or something that requires a lot of research and a lot of hard work, those people genuinely have severe stress and depression, and it's kind of well documented. You also find like a lot of suicides that come from people who are in graduate school. It's not as bleak as I describe it, because since there's such a small number of people who actually pursue higher degrees, it's actually not like a rampant problem, but it does happen, and you do see higher amounts of depression among other things. And it's because we're in a high stress environment. And I knew this going in. It's not like I didn't know that. But I think as time went on, and I've now been in grad school for 4 years, and I would see other people that I had known in my undergrad or in high school moving on with their lives, doing things that eventually I want to do, like have kids, get married, start careers, stuff like that. And you're still stuck in school. And even though by no means am I doing anything wrong. Like, I'm still successful in my own right. I've presented at conferences, I've, dated, I've had other things happen, but it's totally that the grass is greener on the other side kind of syndrome. It's just kind of this weird feeling of, I don't even know how to describe it, but it starts to weigh on you, and it weighed on me. And then there's something we joke about, but it's actually a real thing. And I don't claim to have this. I just know it's a real thing. And we just joke about my PhD program, and it's called imposter syndrome. And it's kind of like, the best way to describe it is you think that you have no idea how you achieved this high of a degree, and you don't think you're as deserving of it as you actually are. And to an extent, I probably have really actually had that, even though me and my colleagues joke about it. But after a while, the stress and the loneliness of being in grad school, working from 8 a.m. to 10 p.m., and then coming home and doing homework and stuff like that, and doing projects and writing, it does affect your social life, and it makes you very lonely. I know I think I worked probably through my birthday last year, among other things. And it all kind of hit a fever pitch last year. I had been having panic attacks and anxiety attacks all throughout grad school, but after last year, I got to a breaking point. So I know that people joke that 2016 is a horrible, horrible year, but for me, it really, really was. In the course of 1 year, I had 3 people fairly close to me die, and 2 of them were from cancer, and one of them was from heart issues, and it was very sudden. But the ones with cancer were very drawn out, and they were people who had had a significant impact on my life. After that, I got into 2 very serious car accidents. One that was essentially my fault, and I'll accept that it was my fault. And then the other one that I honestly probably shouldn't have walked away from, and I did, and it was more of an act of God, if you can call it that. What happened is my tire blew on a busy highway in Houston, Texas, and I really had nowhere to go, so I ended up driving my car into a wall. And I walked away very unscathed, and I got very lucky. But this basically screwed up a lot of insurance stuff for me, which created more stress. And also, it left me without a car for 6 months, which in Texas is crippling in a sense because it's a very spread out area. And so I had to get all my rides ahead of time and, beg people for rides, which made me anxious and also added more to my stress. On top of all that, I started a relationship with someone who was abusive. Thankfully, not physically, but emotionally. Very manipulative, very bad person. And that's the one thing that I really do blame at least my depression for, because I was so lonely that I became desperate, and I gave attention to someone I think in a better mindset I would never have given the time of day, because I would have seen the red flags faster. And, it only lasted for 6 months, but it was a horrible experience, especially for someone who is already having issues with mental illness. So about halfway through the year, this year of terribleness, I had kind of a mental breakdown, and it wasn't really dramatic. like I've seen other people have mental breakdowns for. But it was kind of scary. And so what happened was that I woke up one morning, and it was a weekend. I didn't have to do any work. I didn't have any papers. I didn't have anything. This is the first week off I had on in a long time that wasn't a holiday. And one of the things I will say is, I guess to make up for my lack of social life, I do have a ton of hobbies, and I love reading, I love doing computer stuff, and I really love video games. I have a ridiculous video game collection. And that day, instead of doing anything that I enjoy, I didn't want to do anything. And I ended up having a really bad panic attack, and I spent a good chunk of the day crying. It wasn't about anything in particular. It was just, I just felt so terrible, and it's hard to describe, but it literally feels like there's just a black cloud or a darkness surrounding you, and you kind of are putting on a false face. And that was my wake up call. Not too dramatic, but just something is not right. And I ended up going to a therapist, and I ended up working with my doctor, and they put me on some antidepressant anxiety medication, as well as going to therapy. I'll admit, for somebody whose family and has all the resources, it took me a shit long to go to somebody when I clearly was spiraling. And I wish I had gone to somebody sooner, because it would have saved a lot of time. It would have saved a lot of sadness and a lot of just feeling like shit when I didn't have to. And that's something that I would really like to stress. If you think that you're having all these symptoms and something is not right, please reach out for help, because it does get worse. It probably won't go away on its own. I mean, everybody gets depressed, I would say. Everyone gets depressed. But it only should last for maybe a day or two. If it lasts for a bit longer than that, or if your symptoms increase in severity, you need to reach out for help, because these things they get worse, and there's no shame in asking for help. There's no shame in being medicated. And I'm actually not going to be medicated forever. One of the things I do like about studying toxicology, which is what I study for my degree, is that I have to understand what these drugs do in order to determine things such as impairment. And because of that, I get to understand a lot about mental illness, in a sense. I'm not a therapist and I don't take any therapy classes, but I do get to understand what's going on a chemical level. And there's no shame in taking medication, because just like any other part of the body, your brain can get sick. And sometimes you need the medication to make sure that everything in your brain chemically is working correctly. Because for some people it doesn't. And this could be genetic. This could also be situational. You may need to take the medicine to get your brain back into shape, and then you can be off it, or you may never be off of it. And I guess that's kind of spirals into my final thoughts on this whole thing, because that's my experience. And it's something I still struggle with today. Recovery takes a lot of time. It's not like you go to therapy for 3 months and take some medication and everything is better. It takes time. I actually began my treatment probably about the middle of last year, because I'm coming up on a year of being on medication. And I was still in that abusive relationship. It took me a while to figure things out. And I was also still very depressed and still struggling. And it's not something that happens overnight. It has to take time. You have to keep working on yourself. You have to keep, being medicated, keep talking to somebody, but you have to work at it. And another important thing is that, another reason why it's important to seek treatment and why it's important to seek some kind of medical diagnosis is that a lot of this might not even be an actual mental illness, in a sense. When I was getting diagnosed with depression, I was working with my therapist and my doctor, and they were working together, because there are certain other body parts that can, have issues, and it can cause depression as a symptom. It's not just a disorder, it can also be a symptom. So my doctor's very good, and she did a bunch of things like test my thyroid, test a bunch of other things that can cause depression. Because if you give antidepressants to someone who like has a thyroid disorder, it's not going to stop your depression, because you're only treating a symptom, you're not treating the behavior. And that's why it's important to get a diagnosis, because and an official diagnosis. And I know that some people are not in a good financial situation like I am, but it's still very important to get this diagnosis, because you might be treating the wrong thing. And especially mental illness is extremely hard to diagnose, especially by yourself, because it's subjective. So my thing is even though it's expensive, there are programs out there that you can use to help you find some place to help you. I wouldn't say for cheap, but for a lot less money than you would pay to just go to any doctor, and they'll get you healthy, because it's very important to get a diagnosis, because you need to be treating the right disorder, whether it's physiological or it's mental. And I just want to just state again, don't write this off as normal if it's not. If it's happening for days, if it's on and off, if it's extreme, it's not normal. Everybody gets depressed to an extent, but there's a difference between being a little bit sad and having full-blown depression. And the thing about it with me is I had people telling me something was wrong, and I ignored it for way longer than I should have. Take the advice of people who know you. Nobody in this world is genuinely alone. Somebody is going to be able to recognize that something is off, and they're going to want to help you. It's always important to take their help. Don't just ignore them or write it off. And don't write yourself off. If you're having these issues, seek help, get a diagnosis, get treatment so you can be back to normal. And I know that's easier said than done for some people, because there is still a lot of stigma around mental illness. But all I can say is ignore those people, because there's nothing to be ashamed of. Your brain gets sick just as much as your body gets sick, and you can live a perfectly somewhat normal life, but you need to work on yourself. I'd like to thank Trucker for letting me be in this video, and I hope everybody has a good week.
Alright, now she has one of the more common stories of mental illness, probably the biggest part that attributes to the 1 in 5 statistic that I've heard about of mental illness affecting Americans. Up next we have a helping hand who has issues that are more deeply rooted, I'd suppose, in chemical imbalances or something similar that we just don't fully understand yet, or psychiatric issues. And these are issues that are probably with you for your entire life and you struggle with. And it's a really difficult story, and I want to thank him ahead of time very much for sharing his story. And this is really brave of him, and I really appreciate him. He's a very nice man. And so let's hear what a helping hand has to say with his experiences with mental illness and what he has come to do to help deal with or cope with such issues.
When I was asked to relay my story for this collaboration, honestly, I struggled with it. It's not something that's easy to put into words. It's not something that's easy to explain to those who have never experienced it for themselves, especially when dealing with multiple ill-conceived diagnoses. This is something I've been living with my whole life, and needless to say, it has left me with a shaky grasp at best on what normal really is. Further, many of the details are quite personal, and not something I've been particularly comfortable discussing. Unfortunately, my parents and I never really attempted to address this problem until my junior year in high school. So, up to the age of 17, school and social life were a nightmare, especially in my early childhood. I was unstable to say the least. I was prone to violent outbursts against my parents, and also against my younger brother, with whom it would often result in fistfights. Social anxiety has always been the worst part of my condition. I didn't get along well with most other children, and it's the primary reason why I started drawing. It provided an escape from the real world. Before the age of 10, I had few friends, and I was barely able to maintain those friendships that I did have. I'd have sporadic episodes of anger and a desire to be alone, sometimes agreeing for friends to come over and hang out, only to panic and hide in one of the bedroom closets until my parents made them leave. And even up into my mid-teens, my parents would often have to do things like order my food for me at restaurants, as even speaking to strangers at that kind of impersonal level was unbearably stressful. Throughout my school career, there was never much importance placed on children's mental health. Awareness was on the rise, certainly, but not enough for my school administration to show any concern. As far as anyone of authority was concerned, it was just the throes of adolescence. What few friends I did have in high school only really gravitated to me as fellow social outcasts, and they were honestly little more than associates to while away the school hours, as I was never inclined to spend time with them off campus. Unfamiliar environments were difficult and parties were hell. And of course, above all else, any prospect of romance was orders of magnitude worse than any other kind of social contact. And honestly, those are details I'd rather keep to myself for the most part, but suffice it to say that it has been one disappointment after another. The only relationship I've had was long distance, because it was an easier and less stressful way to interact, but it only served to make things worse as it came to a traumatic end on my graduation day, and I had wasted my developmental years in that area counting on something that was always destined for failure. Over the years, I've learned certain coping mechanisms for the sake of survival. I've worked at a couple of call centers running tech support, and it has helped to acclimate me to large, noisy crowds of people, as well as how to handle myself professionally. But the panic attacks have remained a problem, and even to this day, I can only stand being in crowds for short periods of time, especially in unfamiliar places. None of this was made any easier by the fact that I've never had a proper understanding of my condition. Psychiatry is still a young science, and much about the workings of the brain isn't yet understood. Diagnosing a mental illness is to take shots in the dark, and finding an effective treatment is largely derived from lengthy bouts of trial and error. Over the past 16 years or so, I've been diagnosed 4 different times by 4 different psychiatrists. First with mild social anxiety disorder, then with type 2 bipolar disorder, then with generalized anxiety disorder, agoraphobia, and mild obsessive-compulsive disorder. And now, as of 2 days ago, I've been diagnosed with what they're referring to as avoidant personality disorder, persistent depressive disorder, and mild somatic symptom disorder. I think it goes without saying that accurately naming the demons in my head makes them no easier to live with, and the benefits are really only clinical. After having battled this problem all my life, I have little confidence in this treatment plan they've laid out for me. I've been on more medications than I can count, having to weather the withdrawal symptoms every time they're changed, and the day-to-day grind weighs heavily. Energy-draining illness, bone-crushing depression, disorientation, dizzy spells, and the endless preoccupation with the looming certainty of an early and lonely death make every day a trying ordeal. It's honestly a wonder that I've been able to achieve as much as I have with this channel, and while I'm very grateful for all the praise it's afforded me, the very nature of my condition makes it difficult to retain even a modest amount of self-worth. I suppose it will prevent me from developing an overinflated ego, but at the cost of a healthy level of self-esteem. I really wish there was a positive message I could leave in my contribution here, but the harsh truth is that it's a grueling torment that isn't very well understood. So I suppose the lesson I want you to take away from it is this: be kind and understanding. Try not to judge people for their fears or their obsessions, and try to be empathetic even though you can never truly know the personal battles people have to put up with on a daily basis. But in doing so, also understand that there is a difference between being tolerant and being an enabler. As is consistent with the central message of my channel, you are not entitled to your own definitions of personality, gender, or any other facet of the human psyche. With psychiatry, just as with any other discipline, study and understanding are the only true path to betterment, and subjective feeling should always take a back seat to objective observation.
Thank you very much again, Helping Hand, for sharing your story. Personally, that's quite terrible. If I had to go through it, I don't know how I would. But from knowing you personally, I know that you are a really strong individual with good charisma and a good personality and a good moral compass. You're a good man. So up next we have Master Creep Theater. He has a story of personal experience of trying to get help for his mental illness issues, and quite frankly, just the process of trying to get help for it was really mortifying. I don't know if I could have handled going through something, but if you have ever tried to get help for a mental illness issue, proper medication and or treatment, and just the experience of getting help was horrible, you should really listen to his story.
Hello, my name is JC. I've been requested to give my experiences with mental health in a quick, concise fashion, albeit being concise has never been my strong suit, but I'll try my damnedest to give it a shot. I am sorry for my voice. I am currently ill while recording this, but I felt it was important. I've been living with my particular diagnosis of anxiety, depression, and ADHD my entire life. I was in 5 different preschools for behavior issues. I was in a special education middle and high school, and into my adult life, after much fighting and scraping against the walls in regards to my mental health, I'm finally on a series of medications. I don't know what life without these conditions is like. but I'm well aware of what trying to get help is like, particularly in a seemingly regressive state like Tennessee when you don't have money. I was an animal as far as I'm concerned. I was afraid of the entire world and I acted that way. I never left my apartment. I was scared away from job after job, and my fear became the only thing in life I could remember besides the crippling depression that accompanied it. And it took a very long time after college to find providers of mental health care, particularly now that I find myself to be as low income as it gets. When I had finally had enough and decided I needed help the first time after my move to Tennessee, I went to the ER with a friend of mine because I didn't know what else to do. He and I both said that I was not a threat to myself or anyone else, and I would not cause harm. I just needed them to ensure me that I wasn't about to be kept in any form of captivity or restraint so that I didn't lose what little nerve I had left and that I needed an outpatient referral. Well, the moment my friend had to leave to sleep for work, their protocol for someone afraid and not wanting to be confined was to put me in a glass room and remove all of my clothing until a van could pick me up. It should be noted that I was not allowed to leave. When the van did pick me up, I was transported right across the street to an inpatient facility. I was not allowed into that facility until I undressed yet again and was then searched for drugs in my mouth, under the places where my skin overlapped, and my anus, despite the fact that I was an ER walk-in and had no idea I was going to be transported elsewhere. I did not need this type of treatment, and simply wanted an outpatient recommendation which I had made vocal to the doctor assigned to me at the ER. And when I told my new doctor at the new facility that I could not stay here for 5 days, that it would cause me to not have enough money to pay my bills, they looked at me like I was stupid and asked me why I even came to get help if I wanted them to do nothing. I had to explain to them that I had simply asked for an outpatient referral, and again they looked at me as if I was babbling nonsense and sprouting a second head. And though I don't have any type of proof, I would promise that this was the first time this round of doctors had even heard of me, my wishes, or that I had walked into the ER for a simple referral to an outpatient facility. They required I call 3 people to tell them I was not a threat to myself or anyone else. Those 3 people included my floor manager at work, since I only had 2 other friends in town. I was fired from my job 2 weeks later. The horror show that was my first foray into trying to receive help knocked me back into my home for a very long time, and I lived by renting out my spare room in exchange for bills and food. And the friends that helped me during this time are gone now. I'm not using my mental health as an excuse for my behaviors and my actions that drove away the people I love, but one must understand that the actions of a calm, in-control man and the actions of one consistently on the brink of an anxiety attack are much different. And I have to wonder if the people I care about would still be in my life if I hadn't been scared out of trying. The only thing that got me help was the fact that my illness is persistent and never-ending, and eventually outweighs the bad memories of failed attempts at healing. I tried twice more, and the overarching belief of the people I saw seemed to be that I was a drug addict seeking medications because I claimed to be ADHD, and that disorder is treated with Schedule 1 amphetamines. I was told no straight to my face with a finger pointing at me. I've had medicine managers slap their desks at me. I went through 3 medication specialists before I had finally given up yet again, this decision also being assisted by the fact that despite my wishes to never try another antidepressant with me, were consistently ignored as every medication they tried with me was indeed an antidepressant. But I was angry. I was upset that what few problems I had could not be solved by the professionals of Tennessee. So I emailed my senators. One was a copy-paste email about what he'd done previously for mental health. The other got me in touch with the director of licensure for my district, Mr. King. And Mr. King said the most demoralizing thing I could hear him say. He wasn't the guy to talk to. I should contact my senator, who only brought me back to Mr. King. It was during this unending circle jerk when I spoke to a man named Matt who worked for the inpatient facility I was originally placed in that got me fired. And he informed me that one of my complaints, that I was stripped naked and searched, was not a protocol of the company. So essentially, I was molested. I had a nurse undress me, bend me over, and take his sweet time searching. Except that wasn't what happened. I had lived with that belief for about a month, and then I had met with an inpatient facilitator at the facility in question who informed me that that particular search protocol was in fact real and that I wasn't molested. It made me look like a lying, emotion-grubbing shithead, and I couldn't have been made to feel any lower than I did that day. 2 years, so many attempts, and I couldn't even complain about my experiences because no matter who I spoke to, they weren't the right person, and the story kept changing. The level of powerlessness I felt is incomparable, and I have no history of violence. I've never been convicted of any type of crime more lofty than a traffic ticket. My disorders have been documented with my high school and middle school, and the way the mental health industry of Tennessee treated me, I might as well have been a child-molesting, drug-addicted, bank-robbing fuckwad with an annoying face that just inappropriately pet their family dog. The only thing that got me to attempt treatment again was the results of the election in America. Because as hard as it was for me to seek any type of help, it would not get easier with a man like Donald Trump at the top of the ladder. And it was a good thing that I tried again, because I found the medication that at least helps. But I'm unable to be placed on medication for my ADHD because of the facility that I'm seeking treatment through, which is a low-income facility. If I were to take the amphetamines for my ADHD, I would have to drop whatever I was doing at their beck and call for random pill counts and submit myself for a urinalysis test whenever they so choose, both making my ability to hold a job without a car far more difficult and furthering a witch hunt for drug users. I would legitimately have to walk 2 miles there and 2 miles back whenever they decided I had to. I wouldn't be so aggravated, but private mental health providers and facilities do not have this level of rigorous policing until signs show indications that the medication has been abused. And that seems to be the overarching theme of mental health in my state. Guilty until proven innocent. If you are sick and you live in Tennessee and it's mental, good fucking luck. Because the moment you step in for assistance, you will be treated like a drug-seeking pillhead, and you will want to give up. Despite the fact that people with mental health deficiencies are often already hurtling over every roadblock they have in their minds to get into the door, mental health facilities for low-income families and individuals will treat you like dirt until you believe in your heart that you are dirt. But in that harsh bullshit, I found the strength to fight to get what I needed. At least some of what I needed, even if I never got the ability to file a complaint correctly, and I never figured out who the right guy to talk to was. Because it wasn't the director of licensure for the eastern portion of the state of Tennessee, and it wasn't my senators. One of which has actually refused to meet with his constituents anymore, because he's tired of hearing left-wing ideals. Tennessee, you literally, and without hyperbole, make me sick. And you obviously can't treat people for the sickness you not only fail to assist in healing, but further. When I went inpatient in November, I had met people who had been in that facility 5, 6, 7 goddamn times. And it took so long for me to get what little I've gotten that I can only assume these people were either needing far more help than you were willing to give, had failed to work their way through your burning hoops to successfully get treatment, or have legitimately had given up on outpatient facilities, relying only on crisis centers for stabilization when they hit downward spirals. If you're not going to start giving your patients a more humanitarian reception and enacting more harsh restrictions on those patients, not as they arrive, but as they are warranted, you will do the exact opposite of what you intend to do and push people away from receiving the help they need, and may indeed make things worse. Of course, some people will need these restrictions, but a light hand is needed when working with people who are already mentally damaged and emotionally impacted, at least until you have reasons to be anything fucking else. Couple these criticisms with the fact that mental health facilities in Tennessee never have beds available and have the budget of a pack of juicy fruit gum, and it's no wonder that the statistic of 1 in 5 people suffering from anxiety hasn't changed in a year. But if you are ill, and you are listening to this right now, I urge you to never let anyone convince you to not get help. It may be hard, it may be an uphill battle for a really long time, but I promise you, it gets easier. There is help. Sooner or later, if you never stop fighting, there is help. Do not let the practices of stupid, bureaucratically run and confused professionals convince you that there's no help. Please keep fighting. I'm standing where you want to be, and it's better. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Master Creep Theater, for sharing your story. Quite frankly, that is an unimaginable event that I hope no one else has to go through, and you're a really strong person for managing to overcome these issues and managing to get yourself some help. Now, to everybody who helped out in this collab, thank you guys. And I do believe that your stories, when put in the hands of the right people, will be able to help them out. That's why I chose a range of issues caused by other factors. And to anybody out there who listened to this story and liked it and feels that this is an issue that they care about personally, I'm currently giving away the rights to all copyrights. Everybody here, other than editing for fallacious purposes, anybody who watched this and got this far, and anybody in general, has complete right to upload this video in full or in part, as long as not done in any fallacious way. Hopefully, if we spread this message enough, somebody that needs to hear a story like these will be able to get the story and the help that they need. Anyway, good night. Good luck, everybody. Hopefully you're all okay. Hopefully these stories help you out.
Thanks for watching, guys. If you like what you saw here, have a look at my other videos and leave me your thoughts in the comments. If you support my message, then please like, favorite, and subscribe. If you'd like to help this channel improve, you can reach out to me on Twitter or on Facebook with any suggestions. And if you'd like to support me more directly, please consider following me on Patreon. Links in the description. Thanks again, and I'll catch you all in my next video.